Welcome to the 14th workshop in the PhD seminar series in business management, and the theme is navigating the PhD terrain, and the topic is advancing academic arguments in research. Now, in this workshop, ladies and gentlemen, we shall be covering the following. We shall be looking at academic research. Then we shall look at arguments in research. We shall move on to the language of arguments. I'll present thereafter the Toulmin model, and then we shall move on up to the importance of arguments and counter-arguments. And then, of course, later on, as we move on to the various models, we shall be able to discuss issues that relate to the awareness of argumentation and noticing your own voice and evaluation of arguments and writing single arguments, ladies and gentlemen. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me now give you the introduction of the workshop so that we really understand exactly where we're coming from and where we are going. I want to say at this material time that usually students do make a number of statements, and I've encountered this especially when students come to my office and they start sharing with me their versions of lamentations. In fact, they start lamenting about the entire PhD exercise and the entire research exercise. And of course, when you go through the lamentations, if you listen carefully and you examine these lamentations, you discover that the lamentations reveal that they are not getting anywhere in their research. They are not getting anywhere in their PhD journey. And one would probably make a statement and say, I have read a number of books. I've read about 5 journal articles. I've read about 20. I've read about 100 journal articles. I've read about 3 major books presenting probably the following theories. But I am stuck. Nonetheless, I'm stuck. I do not know where I'm going. And another student would come up and say, I have read 2 theories, and I don't know what to do. And I don't seem to understand what is presented in this theory. And of course, a few weeks later, these same people who came to your office complaining and making various statements may come back, and then they say, well, right now we have now reached possibly a figure of around 150 or 120 journal articles. And those are the papers we have read. And possibly I've also added 2 other books, and I've read about 4 or 5. And the fellow makes similar statement and says, all the same, I'm still stuck. Yes, and I want to say this morning, ladies and gentlemen, as you are attending this workshop, that you can read 400 journal articles and still be more stuck than ever. And the reason is very simple. It's because we do not observe some of the simple, basic rules of academic research and academic writing. And of course, the kind of advice I would give to such individuals who are stuck and they do not know what to do right now is to make you understand what research is all about. I want to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that research writing is not writing about research. And I want to repeat that statement so that you understand exactly what we are talking about. Research writing is not writing about research. And of course, if you really think that you are writing about research, then in one way or the other, you will be tempted to read so many journal articles and read in any way you want to read and then start writing about it. Now, on the contrary, you can only write research based on the research that you have undertaken. So you can only write if based on the research. And you can only write if you have something to say, ladies and gentlemen. If you have nothing to say, then you cannot start talking about research. You can only do research and write about research if you have something that you have to say, ladies and gentlemen. Now, of course, as you'll see, the whole process of doing research starts by reading. And you must read a number of journal articles. You must read a number of books. You must read these books that have documented the theories that you intend to use, ladies and gentlemen. So once you have read some literature on the said topic, especially the topic that you want to undertake, you may change what you want to say. You may change what you want to say. You may really come up with an argument that you want to advance in this case. And you cannot start doing research unless you want an argument, unless you have an argument that you want to advance. You cannot really say that you are doing research. Now, whatever the case, ladies and gentlemen, whatever the case may be, organizing everything you do around your argument makes reading and writing very much easier. Now, if you don't know what you want to research on, you have no argument, then you can read as many journal articles as you can, read as many books as you can, but still get stuck because you don't have an argument. And I'm just saying that you need to start having an argument, right? Have an argument, and then read, right, the various journal articles and books, right, around that particular argument, and then thereafter start writing. But if you have no argument, and you want to read and start writing, you are deceiving yourself, ladies and gentlemen. Now, of course, this kind of situation that I'm describing reminds me of a classic school physics experiment, and I'm sure for many of us here who have gone through secondary school education, we've been taught a number of subjects, including chemistry, biology, physics. Now, this reminds me of a classic school physics experiment where you take a flask of cold water and keep on dissolving sugar in it until it will dilute no more. Now, then you heat up the solution and continue to dissolve sugar in it until it will dissolve no further. And finally, you let this supersaturated solution cool down and dip a thin wooden stick into it. Slowly, the solution will start to crystallize around this stick that you have placed in that flask. Now, I draw, ladies and gentlemen, the comparison of reading in that reading is like adding more and more sugar to the solution, but nothing happens except that it becomes completely saturated after a while. And things always start to happen when there is something. And in this case of a flask or that physics experiment, things start happening when you dip in a stick, right? That's when everything now saturates around that stick. So things always start to happen when there is something, right, like the stick around which the solution can crystallize. So, and of course in this case, that thing that we have called the proverbial stick, ladies and gentlemen, as you will see in this workshop, is your argument. So you must have an argument, and you must start with an argument. Now, without it, the research will be overwhelming, and your writing, ladies and gentlemen, lifeless. You can write and write, and at the end of the day, your professor will tell you that what you've written is nonsense. In fact, some of them even use words like rubbish. They will say, this is rubbish. Now, of course, ladies and gentlemen, as I'm telling you this is exactly what happens to most of the students who come to me. Yeah, there was nothing around which their research, right, or there is nothing around which their research can crystallize. In other words, the arguments are missing. And that's why now I'm saying we need to start having academic arguments, and that's where we should begin. So what my advice is, ladies and gentlemen, to you attending this workshop, is that find something to say first, right? And finding something to say first means that you actually start with an argument. And of course you can pick these arguments from various sources, even when you observe what's happening out there in the real world situation. And you may be able to sit down and write that particular perspective of reality and then say, I'm going to argue around this particular aspect of reality. If it's an issue of rationality, for instance, and you have observed individuals having challenges with rational thinking or taking rational decisions, ladies and gentlemen, then you have an argument. Your argument is around rationality. And therefore, once you have that argument, then you can start reading around that particular argument. But you don't read anything that you come across, and then you simply say, I cannot move on. The reason why you can't move on is because you have failed to identify an argument, ladies and gentlemen. So an argument is very important, and that's where every other thing will crystallize, just like that example of the proverbial tree, or actually stick that I've just given you, that you dip in the flask, and then later on the sugar crystallizes around that particular stick, ladies and gentlemen. So again, as I'm saying, this is easier said than done, of course, and I'm saying that because I know how easy it is for us to begin saying that, do that, and of course how difficult it is for students to start developing academic arguments. Now, of course, as you can see, it explains how thinking about research in terms of arguments helps you to overcome all the major research writing challenges. Now, if once you get an argument, you're going to overcome all major research writing challenges. And in fact, for me, I've always told my students that before you start thinking about a topic, right, can you find a construct, right, around which an argument can be made, around which a thesis can be developed? And that's where you should begin. Many students come to me with topics, and somebody will tell you the effect of advertising on sales. Another one will say, I want to really study governance and performance. And then you wonder where this person is coming from and where the person is going. So instead of thinking about topics relating a number of concepts together and constructs together, start with one major concept, right? One major construct around which an argument can be made, around which a thesis can be developed, and around which your major research will be undertaken, ladies and gentlemen. So I think you can see this, this workshop, ladies and gentlemen, aims at making you familiar with the role of arguments, or role of an argument in research, and the language of arguments, or the language of an argument. So let me just move on and take you to another level, having gone through that introduction a little bit detailed. I want to give you an element that relates to academic research. Now, academic research, ladies and gentlemen, is not a strange thing. Academic research is not so strange as most of you purport. You may think that research is difficult, right? But you already know more about it than you realize, ladies and gentlemen. It is a basic human survival skill. Research is nothing more than finding things out. We do it every day, ladies and gentlemen. When watching news, finding out about people and their idiosyncrasies and complexities, ladies and gentlemen, checking out good movies to watch based on reviews and recommendations, determining the best way to do something, and so on. All that is research. So research, or academic research, is not strange because you do it on a daily basis. And maybe what you do on a daily basis may not be reflective of what it takes to undertake academic research. But in one way or the other, you are doing research before you take any decision in life, ladies and gentlemen. So there is just one big difference between everyday research and academic research, ladies and gentlemen. And as you can see, in everyday research, you try to find out stuff that other people already know. But in academic research, you try and find out things that nobody knows yet. And that is the difference with academic research and, of course, the other kinds of research that you do on a daily basis. In academic research, you are the first one to find out something. In other words, you are a knowledge creator, right? But of course, the other type of research, you are not the first person to find out. For instance, the kind of products that you are going to buy from a particular supermarket, or even finding out a type of movie that you want to watch, or probably, based on recommendations, plus a number of other decisions. So it is for this reason, ladies and gentlemen, that to do academic research, you will need to forget and unlearn many of the intellectual habits you learned in school at the undergraduate level, and of course at the master's level. So this process that we are talking about for academic research involves unlearning, right? So I believe at all those levels, you had to learn new knowledge or content, and as it was given to you, or as it was being unleashed to you by your teachers or professors or lecturers at that material time, now it is time for you, right, to start thinking. Now you become a knowledge creator. You are supposed to start thinking about the process of creating knowledge. So to do academic research, you must unlearn most of the things that you learned at the undergraduate and at the bachelor's level. And of course, you have to go through this process consciously. And of course, it's a painful exercise because most of us do not want to drop whatever things that we have covered and learned over a period of time. But you need to do this, ladies and gentlemen. For now, I will highlight just two of the habits that you need to unlearn, ladies and gentlemen. In your previous studies, for instance, you may have passed by finding out what is already known, right? And then simply repeating it in your own words, right? In fact, at that material time, you were knowledge consumers, right? You were knowledge consumers most of the time. Now that is something that you must unlearn, ladies and gentlemen, right? Because you were taught, and then your professors encouraged you to memorize some of those things, or even to have an idea of what they have taught, and you went on and reproduced those things in the exams, and that's why you got a first-class degree probably, or even an upper second. And at that material time, your teacher was actually trying to find out your abilities in terms of cramming and reproducing, right? And that's what happens at most of those levels. So when a professor gives a question, and then you start articulating, questions like define, questions like list, questions like describe, right, etc. You are more or less describing the things that the professor has given you over your entire probably learning journey or class journey. And then when you articulate those things properly, you get your marks, right? Now, at the PhD level, this is totally different. And if you come with that kind of thinking on the PhD program, I can assure you will fail, because at this mature time, you are supposed to think, right, beyond reproducing. And that's one of the habits that you must drop, ladies and gentlemen. This is one of the habits you must unlearn, right? Not consuming knowledge that has been produced over a period of time, and you being comfortable that you understand what the discipline is all about. At this material time, the situation is totally different, right? Because what you did at the bachelor's and undergraduate, at bachelor's and master's level is not actually research. In fact, if you do this at the PhD level, you will fail. You will fail for sure, because research is about finding out things that nobody knows at that moment in time. And since you will no longer simply reproduce knowledge, ladies and gentlemen, but rather create it, you'll have something to say to those in your discipline. And they will listen. In fact, they will sit down and they will develop that thirst for knowledge because they know that you have something new that you are presenting to them. So you will have something to say to those in your discipline. If you're in the area of accounting, you have something to say to the accounting scholars. If you're in the area of marketing, you have something to say to the marketing scholars. If you're in procurement, you have something to say to the procurement scholars. If you're in entrepreneurship, you have something to say to the entrepreneurship scholars. And that is your audience, ladies and gentlemen. So when you join a PhD and you start creating knowledge, you should always understand your audience very well. Your audience is not the Owino market, right, audience. Your audience is not the fellows who are moving around Kampala Road, and your audience is not the people who go to church. It's not constituted by people who go to church to listen to a sermon that is being preached by a preacher somewhere there. No, yours is totally different. You are writing to an academic audience, a scholarly audience that is trying on a daily basis every minute and second to advance knowledge in that particular area, ladies and gentlemen. So you must unlearn the habit of getting knowledge that you have already learned over time and trying to reproduce it, not even repackaging, but reproducing. But even if you repackage, as long as there is nothing new, these fellows in your area of discipline will actually say you have nothing to say. And indeed, they will be right. And if you attend conferences and workshops, research workshops and conferences, and you hear some people making such statements that you have nothing to say, they actually mean it. They are saying you have nothing to say to those in your discipline. In other words, you don't have any argument, you have no argument, and you have nothing new, ladies and gentlemen. So that is quite important for you. Now, instead of mainly repeating what others have said, you must find something you can say to them. So don't repeat what they have said, say something new. Whereas in the past, you studied other authors as an end in itself, now other authors, right, only become a means to the end. Right, and I want you to listen to that attentively, and hopefully you'll be able to understand what we are saying. In the past, ladies and gentlemen, you studied other authors. In other words, you went and picked a journal article, right, authored by a certain scholar, and you read, and that was an end in itself, right, only to be asked to reproduce what you have learned from that journal article. Now, right now, as I speak, if you start your research or academic research where you are supposed to develop an argument and advance an argument, yes, those authors that you consult only become a means to the end. In other words, you get their arguments, understand how far knowledge has developed in that discipline. You must, for instance, gauge the level of debate in your discipline and then add something and proceed, ladies and gentlemen. So, the end is what you want to say, and you read other authors only so that they can help you say what you want to say, ladies and gentlemen. So you will no longer simply repeat, right, the material that they are presenting or the material they have presented. You will no longer simply repeat, but you will argue now. Now you will be having an argument that you can present. So research, therefore, ladies and gentlemen, centers on finding out something that has not been said before. And this is knowledge creation, and of course, then saying it, right? And if you are able to say it, and say it in the way that you will be believed by the disciplinary scholars or disciplinary audience, then that is your argument, ladies and gentlemen. So simply put, the process of research involves the following. First, you must have a reason to say something, right? If you have no reason to say something, do not say it. If you have nothing to say, don't say it. If you have nothing to say, for heaven's sake, do not open your mouth, ladies and gentlemen. Now, to do this, you have to find a problem that others in your discipline either care about or shouldn't care about. Right, and that's what it is. And of course, you find this quite interesting, ladies and gentlemen, because that is what it is. Now, the second thing that you must do, you need to find something to say about the problem, right? Find something to say, right, about this problem, something that has not been said before, and suggests, right, or suggesting that what we know in this case about the problem is inadequate. So, find out what you want to say and say it, and of course arguing that what we already know is inadequate or incommensurate or incomplete, or you have contradictions. And for many of you who have listened to our previous workshops, more so crafting a theorized storyline and literature review, that was workshop, I think, 7 and 8, you may have found out those things already. What I'm trying to do right now is to try and advance this argument of having an argument in research for you to be able to proceed. And of course, for you to develop an argument, you must really review a number of journal articles. And once you can see that the literature is insufficient, you need to tell us what you will do to find the answers to the question, or to find the answer to the question. And this means you have to lay out your research. You have to lay out your research strategy and how you intend to implement that research. And of course, this becomes your research design and methodology, ladies and gentlemen. And finally, once you have executed your research, you will have found the answer to your question, especially the question that you want to answer or the problem that you want to investigate. You will have found the one thing you wanted to say in form of an argument or a concrete argument. Now, this you do when you present your results and conclusions, ladies and gentlemen. Now, in this workshop, we will discuss all of this and demonstrate to you that maintaining an argumentative mind or mindset will make life easy for you. So you must develop an argumentative mindset. You must maintain this argumentative mindset. And once that is developed, and rightly so, you will be able to proceed in your research. And therefore, argumentation is the X factor of academic research. So argumentation is very important, and you can't be a good researcher without making arguments. So always start with the arguments, maintain those arguments, and when you read journal articles, you simply pick ideas that will help you advance your arguments. And of course, this is very important. And let me just again give you the ideas of Richard Andrews, one of the renowned scholars. So argument expert Richard Andrews actually calls this element of argumentation the hidden criterion of research. And he does so because he thinks that although it infuses all research, examiners rarely make it explicit that they are looking for argumentative writing, or what they actually look for when they pick your dissertation and they read and score it. So it's very important for you to know that this is the X factor, and it's very important, and you cannot be a good researcher without having an argument. So argument is not just giving your opinion or criticizing others, ladies and gentlemen. It is much more than this. you rarely learn what it is by not undertaking research, right? So you will only learn, right, what arguments are and what an argument is by doing it. And for now, I will attempt a working definition to get us started. Ladies and gentlemen, remember at the beginning I did tell you that in research you must have an argument, right? So, and an argument is equated to a thesis, right? A thesis is an argument. Now, an argument is a claim, right? So argument is the act of making claims, right? And I'll give you, let me just use an example to demonstrate what I'm talking about. So supposing you have two statements, right? And statement one simply reads, and you can see it on the screen here, statement one is that 1 plus 1 equals 2. That is the first statement. Now the second statement, right, that I will make is Uganda is the best country in the world, right? So you can see I've got two statements. 1 plus 1 equals 2. The second statement is that Uganda is the best country in the world. Now, of course, as you can see, right, from these two statements, only one of the two statements there is an argument. Only one of this, not actually an argument, only one of this statement here is a claim, right, a claim. And and of course the second one isn't. So the first statement, 1 plus 1 equals 2, is not a claim, but a fact. And a fact is something that everyone agrees on as it has become an established truth. Right, now people know 1 plus 1 is 2, and that's an established truth now. 2 plus 2 equals 4, an established truth. 3 plus 3 equals 6, an established truth. 3 times 3 equals 9, an established truth. But when you say Uganda is the best country in the world, that is a claim, ladies and gentlemen. Uganda is the best country in the world is a claim because it is a statement about which there are different perspectives. Right, now if all authors had the same view about everything, ladies and gentlemen, there would be no reason to write anything. Because one person could say everything there is to say. Right, and this would be a world of really having uniform views, uniform perspectives, uniform ideas, and therefore you would not probably need research, right? Because all those things we'll be talking about will constitute what we call truth. And if you recall, I did take you through workshops on knowledge, right? And I did say knowledge is justified true beliefs, right? Therefore, the issue of justification is there. Justified true beliefs. The second one is true, right, or truth, right? Truth is another component of knowledge, right? And of course the third one are what we call beliefs, right? Now we are talking about arguments. In research you advance arguments because you have different perspectives. And when you say Uganda is the best country in the world, it will attract a number of other arguments. So we have arguments and counter arguments, right? In other words, we'll be moving towards really having arguments that make sense. Right, so Uganda in this case becomes a claim. But later on I'm going to substantiate and demonstrate to you how we can actually develop proper claims, right? Or what, not actually claims, but proper arguments or correct arguments that can advance our understanding of the discipline or our thinking in that direction, ladies and gentlemen. So in social sciences, ladies and gentlemen, it's important for us to recognize the fact that we have different views, and therefore the issue of having a uniform mind does not exist. And of course, there's a great deal in that case to talk about. Now, the talking takes place around points where there are different perspectives and where there is room for difference. And this is what the concept of argument is all about, ladies and gentlemen. So unless there is an interaction between different ideas, there is no argument, right? But once we have this interaction between different views, different perspectives, and different ideas, then we have an argument or argument. In school and your undergraduate studies and master studies, ladies and gentlemen, you were probably taught not to argue, right? And to pass, you simply had to repeat facts. And this is probably a mindset that has become ingrained in you and has become a habit, which needs to be unlearned, and it won't be easy, ladies and gentlemen. You can't be a good researcher if you simply write down facts. Arguments, right, or argument. Argument is inevitable in the social sciences. In the social sciences, we study a reality that is not purely objective, and thus not based on only facts, right? So you will have facts here and there, but many times you will have different perspectives, opinions, ladies and gentlemen. So instead, reality is often created by people, especially in the social sciences. Reality is often created by people and their beliefs, and may even be influenced by your thoughts as well. And that's why many elements of this reality, such as the money, right, or money, markets, organizations that we see, poverty, would all disappear if humans were no longer on this planet, or if humans were differently conditioned, ladies and gentlemen. So most of the things that we study today in the social sciences, right, they are created by people and their beliefs, and therefore there are so many assumptions around this, and this may even be influenced by your thoughts as well. And therefore many elements of that reality that has been created, such as the things I've just mentioned to you, money, etc., markets, would certainly disappear if humans were no longer on this planet Earth. And you have to start thinking about these things, and that's why social settings change, right? You may find that a finding that you have today relating to a particular community would be rendered inadequate, right, or probably inapplicable after the passage of time. And therefore we need to understand these things. I mean, just take an example, the concept of apartheid that existed in South Africa so many years ago, the issues of slavery and slave trade, right? Although today you may have apartheid and slavery and slave trade, racism and so forth, but they exist in a different context, and therefore you must understand what is happening. And therefore, as researchers, we want to capture that reality very well, and that's why we continuously engage in this exercise of doing research. So human beliefs, ladies and gentlemen, and the concomitant systems influence most of the things that we study. And these beliefs are usually inconsistent, and they change constantly, which means that differences in perspectives will always be around, and almost everything we study will be open to argument. And therefore, argumentation is very important, ladies and gentlemen. As you are pursuing your PhDs, if you really want to come up with original research, right, or you want to come up with new knowledge, then that's what you have to do. Start with an argument. And before getting into argumentative writing in detail, ladies and gentlemen, I first want to help you to see what goes into one single argument, and to become familiar with the language of argument, so that I advance this concept very well. I want to help you understand how we develop arguments and what goes into arguments. And this will enable you to understand the jargon of argument and help you later when you have to put arguments together in your writing, ladies and gentlemen. And this is quite important and quite useful because that is what research is all about. Now, an argument is when you have a message that is you have something to say or a point to make, and because of your unique ideas and because of those unique ideas, it is then possible for there to be an interaction between different views around that particular message. So, if you have a message, right, and you have something to say, or you have a point to make, ladies and gentlemen, and you know very well that that idea that you have, right, that argument that you have, that message that you have, is centered around that unique idea, then it is possible for there to be an interaction between different views around that particular message that you want to craft, ladies and gentlemen. And what I'm going to do right now is very simple, is to give you a model, right? And this is a model that we are going to use to try and understand what argument is, right? That concept of argument. What is that argument? I'm going to use a model that we call the Toulmin model, right? And I'm going to show this here on the screen so that you understand the Toulmin model, ladies and gentlemen. And let's look at a single argument in more detail, and I'll pick one argument that I'm going to help you develop or understand better so that you can develop your arguments. This is the example I'm going to give you, and I hope using this example you'll be able to craft your own arguments and advance your own arguments in this study, ladies and gentlemen. So maybe just remind you, Stephen Toulmin in 1958 identified a number of elements that should appear in a good argument, right? And these are presented in this diagram here, ladies and gentlemen. Now, according to Toulmin, and again, that is a model that we have adopted in this case, you will see in this diagram that you are seeing on this screen here, right? The diagram, you have what we call a claim, right? Actually, as you can see, a claim is part of that argument that you want to make, right? And that is represented by C. There should be an explicit statement of the claim, and that's what we call a C, all right? And you see that in the diagram here, C, claim C. There should be an explicit statement of the claim. So you must start making those, or developing those explicit claims, ladies and gentlemen. And a claim is any statement that allows for differences, right? So you make that clear, like in the example we had earlier on, Uganda is the best country in the world. That was a claim. And that statement that we made allows for differences. And people will come in and they can even easily dismiss that kind of thinking, that kind of claim. Now, the differences you can see here can be in terms of the opposing views, but can also be different ways of interpreting the statement, like Uganda is the best country. So that is C, and that's the claim, and this is where you see it there. Now, of course, again, as you can see, the facts or evidence that support the claim are referred to as data, or D, in this Toulmin model, right, that you are seeing on the screen here. There is a D, and the D is presented on my extreme right, as you can see. There's an arrow that is coming from there, right, data, as you can see. That arrow D. So that is data, right, and the fact or evidence that supports that claim. You don't simply make a claim without supporting that claim. When you say Uganda is the best country in the world, yes, that can be a claim, but you must provide data to support that claim. Otherwise, the claim will be quite easily dismissed. Yes. And therefore, as you can see, data comes from the Latin word datum, which means what is given. Right. I'm sure you are still seeing the diagram here on the board. Key, we started with the C was the claim, and now we go to D, which is the data. Data comes from the Latin word datum, which means what is given. So data is anything, and in this case can be quantitative, it can be qualitative, right? So quantitative and qualitative data that the discipline accepts as being correct, right? So you don't simply present anything, right? You must present something that is accepted by the disciplinary audience. If you're in accounting, you must produce evidence or data, certainly that supports. If you say Uganda is the best country in the world, present evidence that will be accepted by the various scholars. And data may include, in this case, statistics from credible sources, accepted theories, for instance, references to peer-reviewed studies or journals, and more, ladies and gentlemen. So the diagram, I think you are still seeing it on the board here and on the screen here, right? I've just shown you claim, what a claim is, that statement that you make, right, which allows for differences, and then D is the data that you provide to support your claim, ladies and gentlemen. Now, if you look at this diagram very well, you will also see another important aspect that we call W, right? And that's what we call warrant, right? Now, unfortunately, as you can see here, that warrant is not presented by any W, as you can see there, but the W is there. You can write it yourself, right? So you have W against warrant, right? And that W is very important. So Toulmin calls an explanation of why the data is relevant in support of the claim, and that's the warrant. So I know you have provided data that is right, but you must also tell us why that data is relevant, right, in support of the claim. Because you don't simply bring any data, the data must be relevant in support, it must be consistent. It must be supporting the claim that you have put across, and that is W, as you can see on the diagram here. I think you see another arrow going up, right? Of course, we start from the data, warrant, another arrow goes up to the claim up there, ladies and gentlemen. Now, that is very important because a warrant explains why the data leads us to the claim, right? Otherwise, you will be making a claim where you should not make a claim. And people will not even listen to you if your claim is not supported by data, and if the explanation as to why the data is relevant in support of that, if not given, then people will not believe what you're saying. So if someone says your claim is unwarranted, they don't mean you don't have data. No. They simply mean that the data does not seem relevant enough to support your claim. So when you provide the data, ladies and gentlemen, then your data must be warranted, right? So when they say it is unwarranted, they are simply saying you have the data, but the data does not seem relevant enough to support your claim. So therefore, you must provide data that is warranted, right? And I think that is very important in academic writing, in advancing your argument. And all claims are open to different views, ladies and gentlemen, so no claim is certain. So when you come up with your criterion variable, right, and you have a construct around which a thesis can be developed, yes, that is your claim, but for that claim to stand, you must provide data, right, to support your claim, and then you must provide data that is warranted, sufficient data. And that's why when you're writing your background, this is the kind of thing that you are juggling through, right? Because you have a claim, and the claim must come early in your background. Then you must provide the evidence in form of data to support your claim, ladies and gentlemen. And then you must provide warranted data. You must give reasons as to why you think your data supports that claim, ladies and gentlemen. Right, so those are things that constitute an argument, and later on I'll be giving you another perspective that will make our argument complete, ladies and gentlemen. So it's quite important for us to move on and move on and move on and move on so that we understand. And on the diagram, still as you are still looking at the screen, I'm sure you see D, right? That's the data you provide. Then warranted, and that's why you have D leading to C. So you must provide data that actually supports the claim that you have there. And then of course you can see another aspect there that we have provided, which is R. Right, but of course before we go to the R, I want to bring to your attention the Q, right? I don't know whether you can see the Q on the diagram there. So meaning that your claim, right, must have a qualification. Now, it means that we deliberately weaken the claim so as to appear confidently uncertain. That is the other Q that comes in there. So the conditions under which the argument might not be valid are the counter arguments, right? And we call them rebuttal or C. And just look at the diagram there. You have rebuttal, right? And rebuttal there, you see the C, right? And I think when you look at the C there, you see there is a delta C, right? And then you have delta D leading to C, and then delta D, right? And what that means, it means actually if you have D, delta D means not D, and C, right, means C, but delta C means not C, right? And when you say D leading to C, of course, providing data that supports your claim, right? Now, of course, when you have delta into brackets D leading to C, it means that we also look at those aspects that would not really render that condition in existence, ladies and gentlemen. So, we must provide a qualification because you always have delta C, delta DC, and delta D, ladies and gentlemen. And I'll be talking about these things as we continue in this workshop. So as you can see, claims must have qualifications, meaning that we have to deliberately weaken the claim so as to appear confidently uncertain. Otherwise, somebody will say, we already know this and we are certain that this does not exist. Why should you research into it? So, the conditions under which the arguments might not be valid are what we call the counter arguments, right? And these are the rebuttal. When you say delta C, that's a counter argument of C. When you say Uganda is the best country in the world, what is the other counter argument? Right, when you say this is the data that supports this, what is the counter data that can be presented actually to dismiss your argument or your thinking, ladies and gentlemen? So the rebuttal can focus on challenging the claim or challenging the data or challenging the warrant, ladies and gentlemen. And what I'm going to do now is to give you an example before we rest our discussion. Right, and I'm going to help you see how an argument can be developed. So let's take an example and transform it from a poor argument into a good argument. So I'm going to give you a very poor argument so that we improve it up to a good argument, so that you see how we can write the background of your studies or the introduction section very well by introducing the argument, ladies and gentlemen. So, as you can see, that's what we are going to do here, but with each attempt, right, I want you to see or find out if you can identify the elements of the argument it contains and which elements are missing. Since I've just taken you through this, you know what a claim is, the data that must be provided, the warrant and the counter argument. Then I want you to start evaluating the following statements so that we proceed with our discussions. So let's start with this. This is our first attempt. Right, and the statement is put here on the screen for you to see. Universities do not prepare graduates to become employable. So that is our argument, right? But I've given you a poor argument deliberately, and we are going to try and improve it, right? So that is a poor argument, but it has at least one element of an argument, and that is the claim. So that argument has one element, which is the claim, right? But it doesn't have, I don't know whether you've been examining this, it doesn't have data, right? It doesn't have a qualification, right? It doesn't have a rebuttal, right? And it doesn't have, of course, the W, right? Which in this case we called, can somebody remind me what our W was? If you were very attentive, you would know what W is. That was a warrant. Right, a warrant must be there. A claim must be there. Warrant must be there, right? And that's providing data that supports the claim. So your data is warranted. Having a qualification, so you deliberately weaken, right? And of course having a rebuttal, which is a counter argument, right? So universities do not prepare graduates to become employable is our claim there. It's a poor argument, but it has one element of the argument that we call a claim. So this statement is a claim because it is possible for there to be more than one view about it. Some people may say that universities do prepare graduates, right? While others may say that it depends on various factors, like the direction of the study, right? But a claim in this case, ladies and gentlemen, needs to be supported by evidence. Evidence is missing. So to improve it, let's go to our next attempt, right? And the next attempt, I'm going to provide evidence so that you understand what you're talking about. So you can see the evidence on the screen here. And the evidence actually simply says, the youth unemployment rate is 55%. And that's from SSA 2012 or 2019 or 2020. So universities do not prepare graduates to become employable, right? That's what we have there. The youth unemployment rate before we rest our discussion. Right, and I'm going to help you see how an argument can be developed. So let's take an example and transform it from a poor argument into a good argument. So I'm going to give you a very poor argument so that we improve it up to a good argument so that you see how we can write the background of your studies or the introduction section very well by introducing the argument, ladies and gentlemen. So as you can see, that's what we are going to do here, but with each attempt, right, I want you to see or find out if you can identify the elements of the argument it contains and which elements are missing. Since I've just taken you through this, you know what a claim is, the data that must be provided, the warrant and the counter argument, then I want you to start evaluating the following statements so that we proceed with our discussions. So let's start with this. This is our first attempt, right? And the statement is put here on the screen for you to see. Universities do not prepare graduates to become employable. So that is our argument, right? But I've given you a poor argument deliberately, and we are going to try and improve it, right? So that is a poor argument, but it has at least one element of an argument, and that's the claim. So that argument has one element, which is the claim, right? But it doesn't have, I don't know whether you've been examining this, it doesn't have data, right? It doesn't have a qualification, right? It doesn't have a rebuttal, right? And it doesn't have, of course, the W, right, which in this case we called, can somebody remind me what our W was? If you were very attentive, you would know what W is. That was a warrant. Right, a warrant must be there. A claim must be there. Warrant must be there, right? And that's providing data that supports the claim. So your data is warranted. Having a qualification, so you deliberately weaken, right? And of course having a rebuttal, which is a counter argument, right? So universities do not prepare graduates to become employable is our claim there. It's a poor argument, but it has one element of the argument that we call a claim. So this statement is a claim because it is possible for there to be more than one view about it. Some people may say that universities do prepare graduates, right? While others may say that it depends on various factors, like the direction of the study, right? But a claim in this case, ladies and gentlemen, needs to be supported by evidence. Evidence is missing. So to improve it, let's go to our next attempt, right? And the next attempt, I'm going to provide evidence so that you understand what you're talking about. So you can see the evidence on the screen here. And the evidence actually simply says, the youth unemployment rate is 55%. And that's from SSA 2012 or 2019 or 2020. So universities do not prepare graduates to become employable, right? That's what we have there. The youth unemployment rate is 55%, and therefore you go ahead and make a statement, universities do not prepare graduates to become employable, and that's the statement that we had earlier on. So, as you can see, the evidence has been provided, right, with a credible reference from a government statistical agency. However, this data that you see on the screen, the youth unemployment rate is 55%, right? That evidence that has been provided, right, from that credible government agency is disconnected from the claim, right? As you can see, in that it is not clear how the evidence leads to the claim. Let me just look at the two statements. The youth unemployment rate is 55%. Universities do not prepare graduates to become employable. I mean, look at the connection between the two. And that's how we usually construct our arguments. And you take it to the supervisor without even thinking through very hard, or you even send your manuscript for publication. But the ideas are quite difficult to understand, ladies and gentlemen. So as you can see, the data seems to be disconnected from the claim, right? Because it is unclear how the evidence leads to that particular claim. So in this case, ladies and gentlemen, W is needed, a warrant is needed to explain how the data is connected to the claim. Right, so let's take another attempt on the screen. As you can see here, the youth unemployment rate is 55%, right, blah, blah, blah. A quarter of these young people have studied towards a qualification at a university, right? And we proceed, universities do not prepare graduates to become employable. Right, I think you can see now, the phrase, right, as you can see it on the screen here, which I've put in italics, right, links the data to the claim. I'm sure you can see, because it refers to the data, and here we are saying a quarter, right, of the 55%, right, and that's what you're saying, a quarter of these young people have studied towards a qualification. So the youth unemployment rate is 55%, but a quarter of the 55%, a quarter of these young people have studied towards the qualification of the university, right? And then, of course, from there, you continue to say, universities do not prepare graduates to become employable. So, the phrase there, a quarter of the 55, that's the data, and there is a claim also they studied at a university. Now, this is a little bit clear, as you can see it on the screen, right, how the data leads to the claim, right, but the argument is still not very strong. So at the moment, the argument is not credible enough because the claim is too strong. So we must weaken it, right? And if we can afford to weaken this claim, right, a little bit, then we shall be there. So the claim assumes that all universities are the same, and therefore generalizes, suggesting they are not doing their job at all. So you look at private universities, public universities, all of them, right, that they're not doing their job. So in other words, you have generalized. So the claim is too strong. So we need to weaken it a little bit so that we undertake research and we advance our argument very well. So what is missing in this case is a qualification that makes the claim weaker, but the overall argument is stronger. And there are several ways to qualify. So let's look at them using the claim that universities do not prepare their graduates as an example. What follows, ladies and gentlemen, in the next section here will present an argument that reduces the possibility of the claim being true, ladies and gentlemen. So, we want to create an impression, right, that this claim, right, yes, is there and it can stand, but we need to weaken it a little bit, right? And of course, we need to look at the words in the claim here, in the argument, and of course, we can use certain words, right? So we can look at the degree of certainty which can change, right? And then we can say universities might not be preparing their graduates, right? So that was, there we are very certain that universities do not prepare. But now we weaken it a little bit, right, by saying universities, right, may not be preparing their graduates, right? Or we can actually say universities are not preparing their graduates, right? And of course, that will be very important for us. And in this case, we could be more explicit as I'm going to demonstrate to you, that we can actually try to create sentences that range from most certain to least certain, so that we create that kind of uncertainty or weaken the statement a little bit. So we can't move from, for instance, it is certain that, and say universities do not prepare their graduates. It is probably that, right, universities do not prepare their graduates for employment. It is possible that universities do not prepare their graduates for employment. It is unlikely that universities, that kind of thing. So we continue, we move from one point to another point. And of course here, we try to allow no equivocation or argument or room for differences, ladies and gentlemen. Right, so let's move now to another aspect. And the second bit is for us to create distances between you, the person making the claim, and the claim. And when applying this, you acknowledge that the veracity of the claim depends not so much on you, but rather on other people and their research, or even your own point of view. So let me just give you an example here. You can say, for example, it seems that, right? It seems that universities do not prepare their graduates for employment, right? According to recent studies, right, universities are not preparing their graduates. Or you can even say the limited data that we have suggests that universities are not preparing their students for employment. Right, so that is okay. So we can continue by making the claim more specific. We are still working on the claim that we had earlier on that universities do not prepare their graduates for employment. Right, so we can do this again by making the claim more specific. Right, by making parts of the claim more specific, you create an impression that the claim is not universally true. Right. For example, you use the verb, right? Prepare. So qualify, in this case, the verb prepare, you qualify it. And if you're going to qualify that verb, ladies and gentlemen, in other words, you are weakening it, you are saying universities do not adequately prepare. Right, so you are qualifying that verb, prepare. Universities do not adequately prepare graduates for positions in the medical industry. Qualify the noun is another thing you can do. In this case, the noun is graduate, right? Graduate or university or graduates or universities. So you can qualify that noun, right, by saying most universities in African countries do not prepare their graduates. So you're using the word most. So you are qualifying universities by adding the word most. So that is another way of qualifying. You qualify the verb, you can also qualify the noun or the nouns. But you can also add exceptions, right? And exceptions here can be in terms of the nouns or the noun that you're talking about here in this case. So you can add exceptions, such as, except for engineering qualifications, right? Or you're saying, besides the engineering qualifications, right, the top 100 universities, right, do not prepare. Or under certain conditions, right, these universities do not prepare. So in other words, we're adding exceptions, right? Now let us return to our original example to see how the author qualifies the claim and claim with no evidence that we had earlier on was that universities do not prepare graduates to become employable, ladies and gentlemen. Now the claim with evidence, again you can see it on the screen here as the second one. The youth unemployment rate is 55%. Universities do not prepare graduates to become employable. Right, and that was a poor argument, but it has at least one element of an argument, the claim. Now let's return and see how the author qualifies the claim. And this is now the claim with evidence and the qualification, ladies and gentlemen. And this is very specific. The youth unemployment rate is 55%, right? And we provide a citation of SSA 2012. A quarter of these young people have studied towards the qualifications at a university. So it appears that universities play a role in graduates not being employable. Right, not the two phrases in italics here, appears, it appears, as you can see, that qualify the claim. So even though they seem to make the claim weaker, ladies and gentlemen, they, on the contrary, actually make the claim more difficult to attack because the author is saying it appears that universities are failing, not that they are necessarily failing. And it is also more accurate because universities are not the only cause of lack of employability, although they could play a role in this case. So that's what we have, ladies and gentlemen. At this point, the argument is much stronger, but still presents only one view, right? So we need to provide now a rebuttal, the counter-argument, right? Argument and counter-argument. So what is missing is the rebuttal or counter-argument. But you have to be careful how you employ a counter-argument, ladies and gentlemen, because you can actually destroy your argument. So let's try to provide an attempt here, right? How we are going to provide a rebuttal. So let's now say again, you can see this on the screen. The youth unemployment rate is 55%. A quarter of these young people have studied towards a qualification at a university. So it appears that the universities play a role in graduates not being employable. However, Smith, 2019 or 2020, argues that individual characteristics are more important when it comes to determining employability. So the last sentence now, as you can see it on the screen here, throws in a counter-argument, ladies and gentlemen. The author expects the readers to decide for themselves whether they agree or not agree. And that does not work because the point of making an argument is to convince the reader of your point. Right? So, in other words, what has been provided here is not sufficient yet. So, it's important here that if you introduce a rebuttal or a counter-argument, you have to show that what was stated was flawed. So I know you can talk about Smith 2011 argues that individual characteristics, yes, but you are not demonstrating how flawed this kind of argument or inadequate this kind of argument is, ladies and gentlemen. So let me now give you an improved one, right, where we actually try to show that what is stated from the works of Smith is flawed. Right, so we introduce a counter-argument here that you can see on the screen here. The youth unemployment rate is 55%. A quarter of these young people have studied towards a qualification at the university. So it appears that universities play a role in graduates not being employable. However, Smith 2011 argues that individual characteristics are more important when it comes to determining employability. While this is true, Jones 2010 showed that universities can change individual characteristics, right? And this suggests that universities are indeed failing their graduates because instead of developing them as individuals, they focus mainly on conveying generic subject knowledge. So I think, ladies and gentlemen, you can see in this case what has been italicized on the screen here shows that individuals' own abilities influence their employability, but it does not mean that only individual abilities matter. So this is because universities can in fact improve individuals' abilities, which suggests that universities focus on the wrong thing, ladies and gentlemen. So what the author did is agree with the counter-argument, but then turned it around to make it support the original claim in a way you do to the counter-argument what you did to the data that you provided, and of course you try to connect it to your claim, and then of course so that the data is warranted, ladies and gentlemen. So let's briefly look at the importance of counter-arguments. Now some people think, ladies and gentlemen, that counter-arguments are unnecessary, and that's what most people think, right? They think that counter-arguments are unnecessary, but I want to tell you the counter-arguments, in fact, make your claims stronger, right? And clearly, if you use them correctly. The only problem is that most people do not know how to use these counter-arguments very well. Now, to make your arguments clearer and stronger, ladies and gentlemen, you should introduce, right, the arguments of those who have different views than you, and then critique them. And that's very important. A counter-argument can focus on a number of things. And I'm going to show these on the screen. So the counter-argument can focus on a number of things. The counter-argument can focus on a claim by demonstrating or showing that it's flawed. It can also focus on the qualifier, ladies and gentlemen, asserting that the claim is too strong or too weak. And of course, it can also focus on the warrant, showing that the author draws the wrong conclusions from the evidence, but can also focus on data, explaining that the author was erroneous or inappropriate, or used inappropriate data, that kind of thing. And of course, the method also suggesting that the method by which the author generated the data is wrong or inadequate, ladies and gentlemen. So you can criticize those with whom you disagree in your own voice, but this may not come across as credible. So be very careful. You need to use other authors to try to weaken the arguments presented by these other authors, ladies and gentlemen. So what I'm going to do right now, ladies and gentlemen, is to move very fast and, of course, try to close our workshop because we have more or less reached the end, ladies and gentlemen. Counter arguments also clarify your argument, since it allows your readers to use the contrast between what you see as true and false. And we only recognize what is true if we know what is true. We recognize what is false if we know what is true. Knowing what you see as false makes it easier for the reader to understand what is true in this case. So let me take you back to the Toulmin model, and I'm sure you see the Toulmin model here, where you have data. You actually have a claim. You can see the claim there. You have the warrant. You have data, and you have the rebuttal. Yes. Now, if you use the Toulmin model very well, then this Toulmin model may not be, by the way, a very good guide to actually writing argumentatively. I know we shall be reaching that level of writing argumentatively, but it's a very good starting point for us to understand that your argument must have a claim, it must have data, it must have a warrant, and it must have a rebuttal, ladies and gentlemen. That's very important. So we need to look at that element of awareness of argumentation. And in our earlier discussion, if you recall, right from our workshop 1, workshop 2, up to where we are now, I identified the parts of the research process, the problem, for instance, the question, research question, literature review, the design and results, ladies and gentlemen. For now, I just want you to notice how the Toulmin model illuminates how each of these parts is an argument made up of a claim, a data, warrant, and sometimes counter-arguments, ladies and gentlemen. So let me just give you a few scenarios in the interest of time so that we understand what we are talking about. So let's look at one, the problem, right? The problem, that's scenario 1. Problem, and I've shown it here on the screen so that I do not really spend too much time going through everything. So in this case with the problem, argue that you have a reason to say something. That's a problem. A claim, that means there is a problem in the real world, right? And data, discover and outline facts about the real world from credible sources. And then warrant, certainly show how these facts lead to a problem or some group of problems, ladies and gentlemen. And then, of course, counter-argument, as you can see here, try to refute those who might say that this problem does not exist in the real world. Right, that's scenario 1. Now, scenario 2 again, right, you can see that on the board here, scenario 2, argue that what you have to say about this problem has not been said before, right? They claim there is something about the real world problem that we do not know as researchers, right? Data, give reference to previous studies about the real world problem, and then warrant, a systematic review of the study that is organized so as to show that they are inadequate in some way, right? So that is scenario 2. Scenario 3, you can still see that on the screen. Of course, that is now coming from literature. Literature uses this to argue that previous research supports this question. Then your claim is that the literature shows that the question is valid and that well-designed research is likely to produce the answer to that particular question. And then the data is that the collection of theories and empirical studies that is relevant to the question, and then warrant, try to show that the literature speaks to different parts of the question, ladies and gentlemen. And then, of course, scenario 4, which comes from the methodology perspective, in terms of design and methodology, argue that your research is likely to lead to an answer to the question, and they claim I have a good idea what is the best way to find the correct answer to the question, data or the possible designs, especially designs used to undertake the study and collect the data are probably okay. Warrants then show that the design is appropriate given the question, and then counter argument refute those who would argue that other designs are more effective. Right, I think you will be able to see and find out what others have said, ladies and gentlemen. But as we move towards the end, I just want to remind you that you need to notice your own voice in all these writings you are undertaking. So your voice must be noticed, right, in the claims that you are going to make, right. I will show you how to do this in more detail later on, but now we are going to just demonstrate to you how some of these things can be done easily, and then of course at the end of the day be able to evaluate those arguments and also write those single arguments, ladies and gentlemen. Right, so let me say this, ladies and gentlemen. So while the Toulmin model that I said a few minutes ago is not effective in formulating the complex arguments in academic research, as I have already highlighted, it may be useful to you when you have just one argument to make. If you have so many arguments and the complex of these arguments, the Toulmin model will not be able to help you, but it can work as a good starting point for you, ladies and gentlemen. So I want you to follow these steps when you write a single argument, and I'm going to show these things on the screen here so that you understand exactly what we are talking about. So I want you to follow these steps, right, when you're writing arguments so that you are able to do a nice job, right. Identify steps when you write a single argument, right. So that's important, but the most important thing that is pressing here is for you to identify an issue, right? So if you're going to write an argument, what is the issue, right? This is the construct around which the thesis must be developed, right? And this is what constitutes your criterion variable, right? So identify an issue where there are different views. Number two, summarize the different views. Right, very important. Three, decide who you agree with and how you position yourself in the literature, and determine what evidence you will call on to support your position and how the evidence warrants your position. Then use, ladies and gentlemen, use the arguments, right? Use the arguments of the view you agree with to critique the arguments of the view you don't agree with, right? This is based on the claim, qualification, warrant, data, method, etc. With all this at hand, then try to write up your argument by letting the authors interact with the other and using appropriate argumentative languages, ladies and gentlemen. So once you've done all those, I've gone through step 1 up to step 5, as you can see the steps here, 1 up to 5, ladies and gentlemen, you may involve some kind of, well, you go through some kind of thinking, right, thinking process, right. Steps 1 up to 5 are the thinking steps, but may involve some rough written work as well. And step number 6 is the actual writing of this. So when you write up an argument, ladies and gentlemen, there is no correct order in which to place the claim, right? I think you can see this on the screen. No correct order to place the claim, the data, claim represented by C, the data represented by D, the warrant represented by W, Qualification, represented by Q, right? And rebuttal, presented by R, right? Now, in this diagram that I've given you, the table here will show you, right, the kind of order, right? There is no correct order, but as long as really what you are saying makes sense, right? For instance, you can move from the claim to the data, then to the warrant, then to the qualification, rebuttal, and back to the qualification, right? But you can also start from the data, right? Then you move to the warrant, then you go to the claim, then of course you go to the qualification, and then you go back to the rebuttal, and then you go back to the claim, ladies and gentlemen. So this table here simply shows you how you can somehow order your things, ladies and gentlemen. So that is what it is. So ladies and gentlemen, I want to now move towards the end. I will discuss most of the things in our next workshop. I just want to close. Ladies and gentlemen, as I have already indicated, you've been a very nice audience. And right now, I just want to come to the end of this workshop by simply providing a summary of what an argument is all about. And if you recall, in the previous discussions and the examples that I gave you, we attempted to demonstrate the fact that the argument or argument has a claim, and that's what we presented in the midro when we were using the Toulmin model. Then we had the data, right? And of course the data must be relevant. Then we had the warrant, if you recall. We had the qualification, we had the rebuttal, right? And of course all these are important components of our argument, ladies and gentlemen. So in summary, the claim, right, represents exactly what you want to say as a scholar. And you must always start with that claim. So if you're going to develop an argument must have a claim. That is really using the Toulmin model. It must have something new that you want to say. It must have something that is worth sharing with the disciplinary audience, right? A claim is what you want to say. So when you write, you need to make a point to convince, right? It's really make it a point on your part to try and convince others, convince them about the claim that you are making, right? It is only a claim. It is a claim if there can be different perspectives, ladies and gentlemen. So a claim is very important, and that is exactly what you want to say. The second thing in summary is data, right? Your argument must have data, right? And data is what is taken for granted, right? When we talk about data, we are talking about what is taken for granted. And here, we provide evidence that is accepted by the discipline, which could be quantitative or qualitative data, but data that will help us support the claim that we are making, ladies and gentlemen. The third component is what we call the warrant, right? And at this material time of the warrant, try to link the data to the claim, ladies and gentlemen, by showing how and why the data should lead us to believe the claim that you are making. And this is quite important for us, right? So we must be able to move up to that level. Now, of course, that is a warrant, ladies and gentlemen, and the next thing is qualifier, right? Qualifier is important. And qualifier here actually means admitting the possibility of different views, right? So a qualifier must be part of the argument. And a qualifier simply means here that you have read literature you understand what exists in the discipline where you intend to undertake research, and therefore you can qualify your statement, right, by admitting the possibility of differing views or different views. And of course here, oral knowledge, right, is problematic and open to questioning, and we express the degree of certainty with the qualifiers, ladies and gentlemen. So qualifiers are very important as part of the argument. And lastly is a rebuttal, right? And a rebuttal is a counter-argument. So the counter-argument certainly also presents different views or differing views. And of course, here there may be counter-arguments to the claim, right? There could be counter-arguments to the qualifier, there could be counter-arguments to the warrant, or counter-arguments to the data that you have used to advance your claim, ladies and gentlemen. And of course, in this case, you need to know that rebutting strong counter-arguments makes your argument stronger, or probably conceding to rebuttal also helps you to make your position more flexible, ladies and gentlemen. So those are very important things that we need to understand. And as I end, I want to thank you very much. Do not forget the books that I gave you that you must actually read. For instance, you have Mitrowiął and Mason, 1980, and that is really structuring unstructured policy issues, further explorations in a methodology of messy problems. The other book that you need to read is Paelo, 2015, Influence of Cultural Traits on Career Choice and Youth Unemployment. And then you have another book by Swales and Feak, Academic Writing for Graduate Students, second edition, University of Michigan, and then plus a number of other books. Of course, not forgetting the important writings of one of the seasoned scholars, right? And I do not think you will be able to understand these things very well without referring to those writings. So during your free time, please get the works of Arnold Wenzel, 1987 and 1988. Sorry, not 1988, 2017 and 2018. So Wenzel, Arnold Wenzel, 2018 and 2017 is quite important, and it talks about argumentative thinking and writing. Thank you very much for turning up. I wish you a nice time, nice day, stay well, stay safe, bye.